Hey guys, welcome back to this channel. So I want to talk about a problem that Bitcoin has had since its inception, and that's that it's very hard to trade Bitcoin with other people without the use of a centralized exchange. Now, the original transaction that took place on the Bitcoin blockchain was, if you remember, the story about a man who sent Bitcoin to someone else in exchange for some pizza. That was the first one that took place on the Bitcoin Talk forum. But the thing is, I'm sure as you can imagine, not all trading activity can take place this way. The obvious thing is that if you were to do a direct trade with somebody and you sent funds to somebody else, what's to stop them from just running away with your funds? So third-party platforms like exchanges popped up to facilitate transfers between people. Now, when someone trades or someone buys Bitcoin with fiat, they don't necessarily buy it directly from another person. They're buying it from the exchange who's acting on behalf of all the buyers and sellers in that market. And what's good is that because it's nice and convenient and all the trading is done in one place, because all the volume is there, then there can be a low spread, right? So let's just say you've only got a few buyers and a few sellers. Let's just say the price of one Bitcoin is like $1. But you've only got a few buyers and a few sellers. It's very hard to reach the proper market price if there is a low amount of volume. So the more traders that are transacting on this market, the closer you can get to the market price. So this is why over time, centralization in even Bitcoin has just kind of happened organically, because the more money that is just in one place, the cheaper the fees are, the safer it is for everybody to transact. And this is the trend that we've been on since Bitcoin has kind of come about, since the dawn of centralized exchanges. Now, this is a good thing and it's also a bad thing. It's good because we would not have the Bitcoin that we have today, the one that's worth $100,000, the one that's changed the world, unless we had scales of economy. Scales of economy have allowed Bitcoin to evolve into something that it originally was not. Originally, it was just used by a couple of nerds on some niche forums and websites. But that's not the case anymore, and that's because Bitcoin has been able to take advantage of the scales of economy. But the downside is that most transaction, well, basically all of it besides crypto to crypto trades, is from fiat into Bitcoin, right? So how do people get their Bitcoin? Well, they use their fiat currency to buy Bitcoin, and almost all of that happens through centralized exchanges. It's very difficult to do so otherwise, and as a result, all this transaction volume happens through the centralized exchanges. And because they are basically taking up all the volume for this particular very important trade from fiat to Bitcoin, it's created a bottleneck, right? And these bottlenecks are anathema to what Bitcoin was supposed to solve. Bitcoin is supposed to be a decentralized peer-to-peer trading network where there are many different nodes and no one single point of failure. Everyone is supposed to be able to transact directly with other people, because if it happened all in one place and if it was centralized, then that leaves the opportunity for that bottleneck to be taken advantage of, in this case, by state governments. So around the world, countries can regulate cryptocurrency exchanges through the financial sector because they have to deal with banks, and they can place certain rules on these centralized exchanges for what they have to do in order to be able to do business in their country. Now, centralized exchanges are a business, and they're usually willing to acquiesce to these demands because they want to make money. That's fair enough. But the problem is, what happens when the government decides that we want users to dox themselves? We want them, like in the case with what's currently happening in Europe, for those that don't know, Europe is essentially doxing all cryptocurrency users. So every time that you make a transaction to somebody else, you need to identify who that person is, and that person is then going to be forever tied to that wallet address, which completely defeats the purpose of the anonymity that Bitcoin brings. So I got to give a quick example. So this is on crypto.com. You must provide the name of the beneficiary party, that's the receiver of the Bitcoin, and whether the transfer is going to a private wallet or a cryptocurrency exchange account. other supplementary information is required as well. The information of the beneficiary party will then be assigned to the corresponding digital wallet address. You will not be required to furnish the beneficiary party's information for subsequent transfers, yada yada yada. But basically, they want you to betray the anonymity of the person you're sending to, or in the case of yourself, you, let's just say you're sending it to your own hardware wallet, you now need to prove that that hardware wallet is your own, and there are steps that crypto exchanges are going to provide for you in order for you to verify that this is in fact your wallet. So this completely denatures the point of cryptocurrency. The point of crypto meaning anonymous, it is no longer a cryptocurrency, it's just a currency, and that's what nation states want them to be. Nation states have an inverse they have inverse goals to cryptocurrency. Essentially, cryptocurrency is going to be taking away from their power, the power they have over financial and monetary hegemony. Cryptocurrency is taking that away from them, so it doesn't make it makes perfect sense that they're doing this particular thing. So the problem with exchanges, when it comes down to it, is the fact that they are the weak point in the Bitcoin network for all intents and purposes. The Bitcoin itself is perfect. The network itself is perfect. But the fact that you have to turn fiat into Bitcoin it means that this is something that can now be choked. This can be a choke point, right? So I want to talk about the DEXs compared to SEXs, KEXs, or whatever. So a DEX is a decentralized exchange, and a KEX is a centralized exchange. And this was touted to be the way in which crypto users could escape the monopoly that centralized exchanges have created for us. And as we can see, it's been pretty good since we had the DeFi evolution from summer of 2020. It's continued to trend up. And generally, I would say that's a good thing. We went from 0%, to around 10 to 15%. Overall, this is a good thing. But let's talk about what DEXs do and what they don't do. So DEXs, decentralized exchanges, only have the ability to swap funds between crypto. So if you are on Uniswap, you can transfer your Ethereum into some other ERC20 token, or if you're on one of the Solana ones, you can go from Solana to Dog with Hat or something like that. It's just crypto to crypto, but ultimately this is inconsequential because going from crypto to crypto is not that difficult, especially with the technology we have. The problem and the most important thing is being able to turn fiat currency into crypto. Being able to have a bridge between these two worlds has been very difficult to be able to cross, and that's why centralized exchanges, even despite the fact that DeFi has really changed the game in crypto, the reality is that centralized exchanges have an embedded monopoly that we aren't going to get rid of anytime soon. So what exactly is the solution to this? Well, one thing is, I like to go back to how things used to be. So remember that example I mentioned about how the first transaction that ever took place was for a pizza. Where did that transaction take place? Well, it took place on an anonymous forum called Bitcoin Talk, and these two people decided to trade using an unorthodox payment method. They weren't using fiat, they weren't using anything else, they were using pizza. And what's interesting about this particular transaction is the fact that they were simply able to come to an agreement about what the trading conditions were, and they made a gentleman's agreement and they traded, and that was it, right? They weren't forced to trade in a particular currency, use a particular payment method. Two people came together and they chose whatever to trade in whichever way, right? But this is different on centralized exchanges, right? In a centralized exchange, you're forced to trade in a certain way. When you send funds to the exchange, you're forced to do so through a bank transfer, right? And there's many different ways of sending payment, but centralized exchanges just don't allow other kinds of payment. So what I think is the solution is to go back to how trading ought to be, and that's to go back to peer-to-peer trading. Now, since the inception of Bitcoin, peer-to-peer trading was the main way in which you would trade with somebody else until the time of centralized exchanges. You would have to speak with somebody, you would have to gauge their interest, you would have to come up with terms and conditions, and then you would have to send funds to the other person, and then they would send you funds back, right? That was just how it worked. But the reason why peer-to-peer trading wasn't scalable compared to a centralized exchange, which was much more convenient. As I mentioned, a centralized exchange can have scales of economy, fees can be low, spreads can be low. It's basically changed the game. But the reason why peer-to-peer trading couldn't take off in the same way is because it was very hard to trust another person. So let's just say if you did find another person, let's say you found them on Telegram and you say, hey, I'm going to sell you 1 Bitcoin for $100, right? So if you send them 1 Bitcoin, what's to stop them from just not sending you $100? They could just completely disappear, right? Or if they went first, and it's the other way around, if they sent you $100, what's stopping you from just running away with the $100, right? So this was a problem that it was eventually solved through an escrow system. So different peer-to-peer exchanges started popping up, and their principal selling point was that they provided a mechanism that would allow the buyer to comfortably trust that the seller wasn't going to run away with his funds. So when a trade was initiated, the seller would deposit his funds into a third-party escrow wallet that sat in between the buyer, the seller, and the third-party escrow provider, which was the exchange. And the exchange would only intervene if there was a dispute between the buyer and the seller. And most of the time it's not. But in the case of scammers and stuff like that, a dispute would be would occur. And then an arbitration would have to happen, and it can last a few minutes to a few hours or a few days. And the moderator would then, look at the evidence and determine what's going on. And usually it's pretty fair for the most part. Like, it's very easy to determine whether or not someone sent funds or not, or whether they've received funds or not. So the point is that when those funds are received by the seller, then he's going to release the funds that are in escrow, and then the trade is complete. So this is what allowed peer-to-peer trading to continue in the form that it originally took place in, or albeit in a slightly evolved way. But it never was able to catch up to centralized exchanges, just because it just was a little bit harder. Centralized exchanges are almost trustless. Like, when you put your funds on the spot exchange, you just click one button and your order is fulfilled at a very cheap rate. But on the peer-to-peer exchange, you have to open up a trade with the seller, check the trade's conditions. You might have to negotiate with the person you're dealing with, and you have to be really careful for scams. So no matter how much the peer-to-peer trading environment has changed, scammers are always going to be a big part of that ecosystem, and you have to there's a bit of a learning curve to be able to avoid these negative actors. And then on top of that, there's usually a markup above market price. So these people that are selling Bitcoin on these peer-to-peer exchanges, they're able to do so via a number of different payment methods and different trading conditions that you might like, but simply because of supply and demand, they have the ability and the right to charge more than the market price. So if you want to buy Bitcoin for, say, like Revolut or TransferWise or whatever, you're going to end up having to pay like 5% plus above the market rate. So this is why peer-to-peer trading simply couldn't catch up to centralized exchanges. The reality is that as more and more people join the peer-to-peer trading network, there's going to be more and more competition between the sellers, and naturally the rate will continue to go down as they compete with each other. And on top of that, the more volume there is, the more trustworthy sellers will rise to the top. The people with the most feedback will have the most volume, and people will, comfortably trade with someone with like 10,000 feedback as opposed to 0 feedback. And the thing is, it's not a terrible trading system. It's just because of the scale of it, it's not as convenient and cheap as using a centralized exchange. But I believe that this is going to change over time because of the draconian laws that are taking place throughout the world, suppressing cryptocurrency activity. What I'm personally envisioning for the future is that more and more people are going to take their money and start trading on these peer-to-peer cryptocurrency exchanges in lieu of centralized exchanges. And over time, I believe that the rate will go down. closer and closer to market price as we get more volume, and we'll have more and more trustworthy traders, so it's just harder to get scammed in this environment. And I believe that peer-to-peer exchanges are also going to be subject to the rules of economies of scale, similar to what happened with centralized exchanges. I just think that if even 1% of the trading volume of centralized exchanges went to the peer-to-peer trading network in Bitcoin, then I think that it can become cheap enough for the average person to comfortably use these exchanges without having to weigh up the options of using a centralized exchange versus a peer-to-peer cryptocurrency exchange. So guys, if you're interested in checking out a peer-to-peer cryptocurrency exchange, I strongly recommend signing up to Local CoinSwap and HODL HODL. These are two great non-custodial peer-to-peer cryptocurrency exchanges that you can use. There's no KYC involved. There's a lot of very reputable sellers on this website if you want to be able to buy it without paying much above the market rate. So I strongly recommend you check it out, because it's my belief that peer-to-peer cryptocurrency exchanges are the way of the future as centralized exchanges become increasingly controlled and perhaps even corrupted by nation states trying to divert the continued expansion of the Bitcoin world. So guys, if you like this video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.